Center.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to start by sharing a story. When I was a kid, my father used to talk to me often about his life as a kid. And mostly they were positive and filled with wisdom and great life lessons. But one story was about at the Crescentwood Community Center when he was about 12 years old. He and some other Jewish kids from the neighborhood were attacked behind the building, beat up, bloodied, because they were Jews. And it really hasn't been, Mr. Speaker, until today that I have understood and felt the same fear that I suspect my father felt back then. It's with that that I quote something that Professor Erwin Kotler said earlier as we announced a new special envoy on Holocaust remembrance and to combat anti-Semitism. That was that the Jewish population in Canada, Mr. Speaker, represents but 1%. 67% of all hate crimes in Canada are levied, Mr. Speaker, against the Jewish community. This is not to say, Mr. Speaker, that we do not have an issue in diaspora communities across the world and across the country. I appreciate that emotions are running raw. I appreciate that when we are traumatized and conflicts such as this arise, that we are pushed back into our most primitive states, that innately we respond in tribalistic ways where we feel that for our own survival we have to stick with our people. There is certainly danger in that as we seek peace, Mr. Speaker, and I recognize that. I am able to stand on the floor of this House, Mr. Speaker, and say that the loss of every Palestinian child's life is tragic, without but. The loss of every Palestinian life is tragic. It seems as though my colleagues in the NDP are not capable of speaking to what has occurred in Israel without the insertion of the word but, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage them to reflect on the perspective that they have and the ways in which they are contributing to our national dialogue right now on this critically important issue. In the Jewish faith, Mr. Speaker, we have a ceremony that is called the unveiling. It takes place roughly a year after the passing of someone. On Monday, we had the unveiling of the tombstone for my father. And as we were walking to the graveside, we walked past the gravestone, or the headstone rather, of my grandmother. And it reminded me of the importance of relationship. It reminded me of the importance of bridge building. That despite the fact that our emotions are raw, we don't have to agree, Mr. Speaker, on everything. In fact, we are not going to solve the problems of the Middle East in this chamber or in our communities. But what we can do is we can respect one another. We can show empathy. We can engage in dialogue. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I want to come back to what I saw and was reminded of on my grandmother's headstone last week during my father's unveiling. And it said, "Here lies Esther Carr. She made everybody feel like a somebody." She made everybody feel like a somebody. Right now, Mr. Speaker, all of us in this chamber and all of us across the country must make one another feel like a somebody as we work through this incredibly difficult period. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I just want to say I was here for the last speech from the honourable member for the previous member for Winnipeg South Centre, and it does seem like he did pass on some great genes to the member. Questions and comments? Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if this is this member's first speech in this place. We were actually at the same university together years ago, and I didn't expect to be agreeing with him when I asked my first question to him in the House, and I look forward to opportunities in the future we'll have to no doubt cross swords with more. With a greater sharpness in the exchange, but I do want to thank the member for what he shared in his comments, and also invite him to reflect on some of the foregoing discussion about proportionate response versus vengeance, because some members of the House have, I think, tried to characterize any kind of military response to a terrorist attack as being necessarily vengeful. To me, vengeance implies a kind of vicious desire to inflict harm rather than a response that's survival or protection oriented. I wonder if the member can reflect on that distinction as well.
Member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I remember fondly the member opposite and I would debate one another on local Ottawa campus radio some years ago, and he has since then arrived here much sooner than I and made important contributions to our public discourse. The definition of genocide, Mr. Speaker, has a particularly important adjective: deliberate. Deliberate. So when I think of the innocent loss of life of Palestinians and Palestinian children, that my honourable colleague from Edmonton, Strathcona, is certainly right, absolutely, to point out in regards to the tragic nature of how it came to be. I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the reason that we are seeing such loss of life is as a result of the common enemy to the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. That is Hamas. Hamas is the enemy of Palestine and of Israel, Mr. Speaker. And this is something that we must be incredibly mindful and steadfast in our repetition of as we engage in this debate. Very quickly, with the time I have remaining to answer my colleague's question specifically, revenge is not a response to an organization whose fundamental pursuit and objective is to eradicate you and your people from the earth, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments? We do have time for one more. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
I welcome the member to the House. And there is no doubt Hamas is the enemy of the Israeli people, the Palestinian people. The human rights violations have been widespread. The killing of 1,400 innocent people attest to that. And those are brothers and sisters and parents and children who died. And I know that member and any member in this House, if we could have done anything to stop the deaths of 1,400 people, we would have stepped forward. I think the point that the member from Edmonton Strathcona and the leader of the NDP made, I think in this somber occasion, is that because of the collective punishment that is taking place, the bombing in Gaza right now, the death toll is rising. 3,000 people, 1,000 children dead so far, 10,000 wounded. And the question comes, if we could stop the killing of those innocent lives through this bombing, of those brothers and sisters and parents and children, wouldn't we step up to do that? And isn't that what is behind the important call for a ceasefire, to have that humanitarian corridor so that food and water can go to those people who have no food, no medicine, no water, and ensuring that the hostages are released? That is absolutely fundamental as well. Isn't that our role? Shouldn't that be Canada's role, to ensure that there is no further loss of life?
We're almost out of time, but I'll let the honourable member respond. The honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The collective punishment is the collective punishment that Hamas is creating, the conditions that Hamas is creating is collective punishment on its own people and the people of Israel. Mr. Speaker, I would ask my honorable colleague to reflect for a moment throughout this debate and afterwards on what would happen should there be a ceasefire. Of course we want the end to conflict. Of course we want the end of innocent lives lost. Mr. Speaker, what would happen if Hamas were able to continue is that they will rebuild stronger. They will attack again because their objective is the eradication of the Jewish people from the face of the earth, Mr. Speaker. So although I have a deep appreciation for the moral objectivity that the members from the NDP feel that they bring to the conversation, this is not a pragmatic, a practical, or a realistic way in which you deal with a terrorist organization hell-bent on genocide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resume debate.